Hello and welcome to this week's live weekly warm-up. First and foremost, I want to make sure that everybody is staying safe and healthy. I really hope that you all are doing well with all of the crazy coronavirus stuff that's happening. But hey, maybe that's given you a little bit more time to practice. So I hope that this live weekly warm-up is helpful for you and gives you some inspiration for things to be working on, and is maybe helpful to keep you entertained while you're staying inside with lots of time to play your clarinet. So this week's exercise is going to be a little bit of an extension of last week. So last week was the follow-up to the one-note long tone challenge that I started at the beginning of this year, where I'm just playing like one-note long tones, making sure that I can get the sound that I really want on every note. Last week, we extended that a little bit into experimenting with some different note shapes so that we're playing still just one note, but trying to do it at like different dynamics, different note beginnings, and different shapes to the notes. Now we're going to take that and turn it into a more formal articulation exercise. I call this three-part articulation because what we're going to be doing is very specifically and intentionally thinking about the different kinds of articulations we can get by changing those note shapes like what we experimented with last week. So every single articulation has three parts to it. There's the start of the note, the sustain of the note, and then the release of the note. Beginning, middle, and end, just like a good story. And if you're really thinking about putting in that note shape on every single articulation that you do and every single note that you play, it'll end up with some like really nice and musical results. And that's sort of the goal of practicing this stuff and what we want to get out of this exercise. So what we're going to do is try some very specific articulations and think very specifically about those three parts of the note. So the very first one is going to be a very simple, just like legato articulation, where we have a clean square beginning to the note, a even steady sustain, and then just the tiniest bit of separation and the start of another clear note. That's sort of the most basic, where we're thinking just like straight square, basically one sound. That's the kind of like legato articulation I like to practice all the time, because that's the one where if you can get everything really steady, then that allows you to open up the possibilities and change things. But it has to be good and steady first. The second one is going to be like a tenuto. So as you can imagine, a note with like the line under it. This one is kind of a confusing articulation. Some people interpret it as just being really long legato notes, but I actually think it's a little bit more emphasized than that, and it's almost like weighted notes. So still a very clear beginning, and then a little bit more like weight and sustain to the sustain part of the note, the middle part of the note, and then the same good quality ending. Then the next one we'll be doing are accents. Accents are the strongest beginning to notes, and then quite a bit of decay through the sustain all the way to a nice taper. And then finally we have staccatos, which are just like the legatos that we started with, but just with a lot more space in between. So shorter notes, more space in between to get that nice staccato separation. So for this exercise, we're going to hold a long note in between each of those and then see if we can get some consistent notes going with those four different articulations. So that might sound something like this, and I'll just do it on a C, but of course you can do this on many different notes, maybe a different note each time you do it, maybe 4 notes a day, going all over the range of the instrument so you're really comfortable articulating in all of the different registers and different notes. So you can see I did quite a few of each of those articulations because what I was doing as I was going through that, first I started with a good long note, as always, to make sure that my air was really well supported, my embouchure was in the right place, and I was getting the sound I wanted. Then I added in the tongue to make sure that the tongue wasn't interrupting or changing that good quality sound. And then I did several repetitions with thinking of like different tongue motion, maybe changing my focus, thinking about, okay, is my embouchure corners really well supported? Is my air still really going strong? Sort of experimenting around, getting like the very best legato I could. And then I did several repetitions once I had it all sort of dialed in to make sure that it was going really smoothly and I could replicate the results over and over exactly how I wanted. And as we went along, it got a little bit more complicated, and maybe there was a little bit more experimentation needed to like really get the accent shape that I wanted on every single one. As we were doing all of these articulations, it's really important to think about keeping the embouchure and the air as steady as possible and the tongue motion as minimal as possible, just as always when we're articulating. The one difference between like this three-part articulation where we're starting to like add in the tenutos and accents that's different than any other like just normal legato articulation is that now there is a little bit of a change in the air. So like on accents, you put a little bit of emphasis at the beginning with the air, and you have to make sure that that air is in position to have an accented beginning before you release the tongue so that you can do the good accent note shape. This is different, of course, than the sort of normal legato that we go for where we're trying really hard not to have accented beginnings, of course. So as you're thinking about these different note shapes, it's adding another layer of complexity. Remember, playing the clarinet is all simple, but it's a lot of different simple things that we have to be keeping track of. So if you aren't comfortable doing just super steady legato and making that super even, I would focus on that first before you go on to this little bit more advanced articulation where we're changing the note shapes and adjusting the note shapes. If you can't keep everything really controlled and steady, it'll be harder for you to put in these contrasts and changes. But if you're feeling up to the challenge and you have a lot of extra practice time, this might be a good extra step or this three-step articulation to really think about getting all of these different note shapes. So thanks so much for watching and tuning into this week's live weekly warm-up. We will have another one next week. And if you're looking for some more stuff to practice, check out the YouTube video that was released last Saturday at the Quick Start Clarinet YouTube channel. That was some tips for when you've run out of things to practice. So finally, I hope you all are staying safe and healthy. I will see you next week for the live weekly warm-up. And of course, there will be a YouTube video going live this Saturday as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.